So you had these gods, and you talk to ancient cultures and shamans and stuff, and they'll describe these ancient legends and stories about these gods operating in another dimension. The question is why, and it's become clear as I've researched this and others have researched this, that these entities are feeding off human energy. You remember in the Matrix when the Morpheus character held up a battery and said, the Matrix is a computer-generated dream world designed to turn humans into one of these, a battery, a source of energy.
Are they feeding off good energy or bad energy?
That it's very specific. These entities, because of what they do, because they're a bunch of prats and they give evil a bad name, they are in a low vibrational state. So to absorb energy from humans, it has to be low vibrational energy. And what it does, and so people have researched this and experienced this long back, they've given it the name loosh, this low vibrational energy. And it's based on fear, anxiety, depression, anger, hatred. Not so much anger, that can be turned into a positive emotion, but hatred, conflict, war, all these things obviously generate this low vibrational energy, because it's been long known by mainstream science that every time we think and every time we feel an emotion, we're actually generating an energy. We're generating a frequency, and that frequency relates to the nature of the emotion. And fear, which is the tool of oppression in this reality, is a low vibrational emotion. So if I'm looking at you and you're in a terrible emotional state, I can see by your facial expression and I can see by your body language that you're in an emotional state. What I can't see is the energy that emotional state is giving off, because that's outside visible light. It goes into this astral dimension.
Well, you hear people talk about some people can see auras around people and stuff.
It's all
like that.
part of it. Yeah. You go deeper into the field of the visual field than the normal visible light. You'll see things that will just bloody amaze you, because they're so different to the reality that visible light delivers to you. So that's going into the astral. And so every time there's a war, every time there's a conflict, every time there's a big row and there's kind of conflicts and hatred and all this stuff, we're generating this energy and they're feeding off it, which tells you something about the world immediately. There is no incentive whatsoever of these other dimensional entities to have a world of love, of harmony, of peace, of appreciation, of mutual support. None whatsoever. They want a world, and they are generating through this global cult events that are going to generate this low vibrational energy. They want people in states of fear, of worry. Am I going to pay the rent at the end of the month? Oh my God, is my relationship going to survive? Is my job going to survive? What AI? Oh my God. They want this stuff. Now this means they're feeding off human energy. This takes us to these
negative human energy.
Oh, low vibrational human energy, what we would call negative motion. Yeah.
So they're treating us almost like cattle in fear to feed off that
There's a chapter in the roadmap called Loosh Farm. That's what this is to them. It's a way of farming human energy by manipulating events that put people in a state of perception and response that generates this low vibrational energy, which takes us into satanic ritual. What's all that about? What do the gods get out of it? What is adrenochrome? So what they do, and what the ancients did, first of all, they were sacrificing young virgins to the gods. What's young virgins? A code for children. Because, as I've researched this over many, many years, there is a particular energy that these entities want more than any other, and that's the energy of children before puberty, right? This is where you get your massive obsession with pedophilia from, and it's literally all over the world, and it connects into Satanism ultimately. But the energy of children has to be turned into a low vibrational state. So abused children, people who are violently abused, people who are sexually abused in all the ways that they are, that experience of the child puts them in a low vibrational state. And so this prepubescent energy suddenly becomes a low vibrational state that these entities can absorb. This is the whole basis of pedophilia. And so if you're looking at a satanic ritual, they are conducted specifically to generate extreme levels of terror in the victim, understandably, terror. So as the victim is getting more and more terrorized in the build-up to the sacrifice, they're generating this. Terror is an extremely powerful low vibrational energy, and these gods are feeding off it in their astral state around the ritual conducted by their initiates and global cultists.
Almost like a Hunger Games. Like a version of Hunger Games?
Well, I used to call human society for a long time the Hunger Games Society. It basically works in a very similar way. So what then happens is, as this terror manifests itself, it enters the blood in the form of an adrenaline. This terror produces this adrenaline in the blood. And that's what the Satanists drink, and we call it adrenochrome. I've talked to Satanists all over the world who've taken part in these rituals, many with very rich and famous people, often against their will, not always, but often. And they describe how when these Satanists drink the blood of the sacrifice, laced with this adrenochrome, it's like a frickin' drug. They go crazy, right? And that's adrenochrome, and that's what these people are consuming. So all these stories in Washington D.C. about adrenochrome drinkers, it's true. That's what goes on. I've talked to people in America when I was traveling America, talking to no one maybe in those days, but phenomenal for research. Who've taken part in these rituals, and they talk about, for instance, in major rituals, how what they're doing in the way that they're conducted is through the chants and the colors. Everything's a frequency. They're creating a frequency environment, and they often do them on in particular places where they have vortexes on this global grid of so-called ley lines. And where ley lines cross, especially a lot of them, it creates a massive vortex. And they often do rituals at these points. A lot of churches, for instance, are on and cathedrals are on these big vortex points. And what it does is it thins out the vortex, it thins out the frequency difference between this astral dimension and this human dimension. And these Satanists describe how during the rituals, when this energetic environment is created by the ritual, that entities slip through the vortex into this reality. Often they're described as reptilian, but not always, but absolutely non-human entities. And by the way, on the reptilian front, there was a guy called Robert Monroe, and he popularized, he was basically a media executive at the time, radio executive. He popularized through a series of books something called astral traveling, which is when you project your consciousness into the astral dimension without a near death experience. You're very much physically alive, but you project your consciousness into the astral dimension. And he was very skilled at it, and he was so skilled at it that he attracted the attention of the United States military, especially their psychological wing. And they did a study, it was called the Gateway Study, and the CIA declassified the report quite a few years ago. And what they did is they got Robert Monroe and they got other people who were skilled in this astral projection, where you just project your consciousness into this astral dimension. And they did this study on what they experienced in this astral dimension. And of course, they're looking for common themes and confirmatory themes. And one of the things that was a common theme is that they experienced so many reptilian entities in this astral dimension that they gave them a name in the Gateway Project. They called them the alligators. And I've been saying all along that this reptilian manipulation is coming from the astral dimension. That's where the
But the
most of
Egyptians,
them are.
wasn't the Egyptian gatekeepers of the underworld, kind of crocodile?
Yeah, all this stuff.
Man or something.
And you know, I mean, I think they do exist within the earth as well, in some kind of in a physical form, if you like, in our dimension. But overwhelmingly, it's coming from this astral dimension. And it was Robert Monroe that coined the term loosh, because he said, what I learned in these astral travels was that they're feeding off our low vibrational energy, which he gave the name loosh.
That's the thing. If you'd have said this in 1991, but subsequently, you know, Jimmy Savile scandals broke, Jeffrey Epstein scandals broke, you know, there's lots of... Nowadays, it's kind of like, oh yeah, there's something nefarious going on. That's not to mention all the other stuff that's come out about Mountbatten and Edward Heath and all the other allegations that are out there with these kind of paedophilia kind of cults.
Yeah.
It'd have been seen as left field, whereas now it's a lot more mainstream.
Yes, it is. And I met a lady in 1997, I think it was 97, 98, who would have been a close friend of Princess Diana for 9 years until they fell out. And she told me, going one step back, I talked about the 12 separate people I met over a period of 15 days in America, 1996 time, 96, 97, that said they'd seen this phenomenon of someone in a human form turn into a reptile and then go back again. And I came back from America, and I had a meeting scheduled with a lady who said that she used to live with the warden of a place called Burnham Beeches, which is in the west of London. It's an area of copse and clearings and forests and stuff. And it's owned by the City of London, which is a big red flag, because that's really massively part. That City of London so-called square mile is massively part of this global
cities
cult.
within cities.
Oh, massive, massive. So anyway, she said that she went out one night. Let me just come back one step. I go to see her because I want her to tell me about her experience of Satanism, which she'd had being brought up among Satanists. And we finished the conversation, which was very interesting. And I had a cup of tea, and I put my cup of tea down. I said, well, thanks for that. It's nice of you to talk to me. It's very interesting. And as I turned to walk away, I said to her, you know, I've had some amazing experiences. I keep hearing people tell me they've seen people turn into reptiles. And by this time I've turned, and all I can hear in the background is, right? And she's holding her chest when I turn around. What's going on? She said, I weren't going to tell you that. She said, I thought even you'd think I was mad. So, because I haven't gone public on the reptilian thing by this time. And she told me of going through the clearing in Burnham Beaches, where she lived in a house, which I've seen in among the trees. She went through one night, and there was a light, and she crept towards the light and looked through, and she saw a circle of people in long robes. And the guy conducting this ritual was Ted Heath, who was the
Prime Minister.
He was then Prime Minister at
the
the time she experienced this. And next to him was a bloke called Anthony Barber, who was his Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Not Rachel from accounts.
No, but ladies and gentlemen, this is how it works. This is the people that are telling you they're on your side. Anyway, she said, I'm watching. She said, and suddenly Heath transforms into a reptilian figure and grows by about 1 foot 2 feet. That is a common theme you find all over the world. When people see people shapeshift from human to reptilian, the reptilian is taller. And she said, first of all, when he started speaking in a reptilian form, it was like the old transatlantic telephone line where there's big gaps between it, like he's coming from far away. And she said the thing that struck me most was that when the transformation happened, no one in the circle reacted. It was as if to them it was the most common thing that they've experienced, absolutely something they experience all the time. There was no, it was all very much as they expect. And I named in The Biggest Secret in 1997, I named Heath as a Satanist, a pedophile. And the passage was read to him by a local journalist on the Isle of Wight, if you can call her a journalist, in the week of publication. And all he said was, David Icke must be mad, and there was nothing else. It took 17 years for allegations to appear about Heath, who was a absolute brutal paedophile. And Wiltshire police investigated and said if he was still alive, then he would be brought in for questioning on the evidence that we've seen. And that reminded me then of something I experienced. When I was in the Green Party in 1989, the European elections, the polls were showing that the Green Party was suddenly having a real surge in interest. And I was invited onto Sky News, their live election program, to talk about the results as they came in. So I arrived at Sky News, and I got met by this lady in reception, and she took me through to this makeup room. And the door of the makeup room was open. So I walked in, and I sat down, and she said, someone will be along in a minute, and she walked out. So I'm sitting there looking at the mirror, and something caught my eye just to my right. And I turned around, and just behind the door, which is why I couldn't see him, was Ted Heath, who'd just been on the program and was waiting to have his makeup taken off. And so I looked at him, and being a friendly chap, I said, "All right, mate, how you doing?" I couldn't stand his politics, but hello, how are you doing? And he turned, and he looked at me. And in all this experience, he never once said a word. Never said a word. He started at the top of my head, and he went slowly down like that, like the thing that came to me as being scanned in some way. And then he goes to my kind of feet, and then he goes back again to the top of my head, and then turns and looks at the mirror. Never said a word. And then eventually the makeup woman comes in, and it's like, what the fuck just happened? Anyway, while he's scanning me, I'm looking at his eyes, and the entirety of his eyes turn black. Not just the pupils, the whites turn black. And I described it as like looking into two black holes. It was like I was looking through his black eyes into some other dimension. And none of the Betty Shine stuff had happened before, at this point. It was all kind of an experience that was all kind of new to me. I had no way of explaining what I was seeing. And as I then when I really started getting into this information, I kind of remembered that, and I started researching what they call the black-eyed people. And you find there are stories all over the world of exactly that same experience of people seeing someone and their eyes, including the whites, turn jet black. Because these people are not human.